Even for the most prolific and plugged-in video game players, there's going to be some series that you end up a little late to the party on, and with some franchises that have been going on for decades, it can be hard to know where to jump in. Should you play the first title released, the most recent, the most critically acclaimed? Maybe you should throw a bunch of games into a trash bag and grab one out randomly. The Zelda series is no stranger to this phenomenon. With Switch sales through the roof and more people playing games than ever, there's going to be a lot of newcomers who think, hey, maybe I should give this Zelda thing a try. Well, if that's you and you're sitting there with the fear of being called a fake gamer for having never played a Zelda game, don't worry, because there is the perfect title for you to start with, Link's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch. It's a remake of the 1993 Game Boy title and follows it pretty closely, but has a number of graphical, quality of life, and gameplay improvements that make it more approachable than the original. It's very similar to other 2D Zelda games like Link to the Past, which is absolutely ideal for new players. 2D games often have a lot less filler in them than 3D ones. The overworld isn't huge, which is good, as to not be overwhelming, but it is very dense. There's no wasted space anywhere on the map. Compare that with a lot of modern 3D games, where so much time seems to be spent walking from objective to objective. There's no wasted time over the course of the game. It's very focused. Find the key, get to the dungeon, beat the boss. Find the key, get to the dungeon, beat the boss. It's a very addictive and fun gameplay loop that the developers waste no time getting you right into. If it turns out that Zelda isn't your thing, you're gonna know it right away. The top-down view also makes the world very clear to understand, and not just for newcomers to the Zelda series, but to gaming entirely. Once you've swung your sword a few times, you know exactly how far it reaches and how fast it comes out. You don't have to mess around with Z targeting or switching your camera back and forth when you want to take on multiple enemies. It's so much better for a new player to just be able to focus on fighting a boss rather than fighting a boss and controlling a camera at the same time. The shifting screens when you're moving through a dungeon might feel a bit antiquated to seasoned players, but for those new to the series, it's a massive help. It assists in segmenting the dungeon in your mind, keeping each room distinct, which gives you a better understanding of what is where. This works perfectly in tandem with the map screen, and boy, that map screen. It's so clear and well laid out for both the dungeons and the overworld. You can see the chests that you've already opened or not gotten to yet, place pins, and easily tell which room is which by the layout. I hope other game designers have taken notice, because this is how you do a map screen. Plus, here's a small piece of advice for new players. When you're in a dungeon, place matching pins at the staircases that lead to each other when you find them. You'll be so happy you did. And speaking of the dungeons, like the overworld, they're a lot smaller than other Zelda games. While veterans of the series might not love this, for new players it's perfect. The dungeons never feel overwhelming, and they never overstay their welcome. In the dungeons of a lot of other Zelda games, designers focus on taking one mechanic and exploring it to its fullest potential. Link's Awakening follows this mantra somewhat, but to a much smaller degree. You won't find a dungeon that's fully designed around the hook shot like you might in other games, but this is ideal for first timers. If one dungeon focuses entirely on an item or a mechanic that the player has trouble with, they might become frustrated and you risk losing them as a player at that point in the game. But if it's just a few puzzles that use that mechanic, it's more likely that will be something they can work through and get past. However, the dungeon bosses do closely follow the pattern of use the item you got here to beat them. This makes them all pretty simple to figure out how to defeat, and satisfying as a culmination of what you've accomplished in the dungeon. Of course, this does make all the bosses pretty easy, but that's something that's consistent throughout the rest of the game. Standard enemies don't take more than 2 hits, and your shield is super useful for blocking attacks. And because the overworld and dungeons aren't dauntingly large, there's not too much to get confused about. Plus, items are introduced at a steady enough pace to not be overwhelmed. One of the big challenges a lot of new players have when it comes to the Zelda series is knowing where to go next. Everyone who's played one of the games can relate to the feeling of getting out of a dungeon and going, okay, now where am I supposed to go? Thankfully, Link's Awakening gets ahead of the issue with hints on top of hints on top of hints, directing the player where to go and what to do. You've got this moderately suspicious owl telling you where the keys are, mystical words appearing once you beat a dungeon, a dude that you can call on the phone, and a bunch of different buildings scattered throughout the map, and even within dungeons there's owl statues that you can use for tips. And the best part about this is, at any time you can view these past hints again on the map screen, which is so helpful if you've forgotten what they said or just weren't paying attention. And so even though longtime Zelda fans might find some of these additions unnecessary, those new to the series will find them absolutely essential. Jumping into a long-running series can be an intimidating task, but thankfully, Link's Awakening is there to guide new players into the rich and fascinating world that the Zelda series holds. There's so many great games throughout the series that excel in different areas. Even though not every title will appeal to all Zelda fans, I can't think of a better stepping stone into the historic series than Link's Awakening.